The scent of aged paper and fine-grain wood polish was not comforting, it was suffocating. I spent my days beneath fluorescent bulbs in the sterile heart of the New Haven Historical Museum, cataloging other people's memories, relics of lives far more interesting than my own. I was the archivist, Amanda, keeper of the forgotten, and, lately, I felt entirely included in that collection. My existence had settled into a predictable rhythm: 9 to 5, lukewarm coffee, and the endless ticking of a grandfather clock in the next room, marking time I wasn't really using. The town of New Haven was small, quiet, and utterly unremarkable. Its most exciting historical event, being a moderately successful apple harvest, sometime around the year 1889. I was 24 years old, and my ambition, once a bright, burning thing, had become a low, sputtering ember buried under the ash of my own stagnant routine. I desperately needed a break, a mystery, an earthquake, anything, to shake the tedious certainty of my future. I yearned for the kind of adventure found in the brittle texts I handled daily, but the closest I ever got was identifying the century of a rusted spoon. This morning's task was particularly uninspiring. A massive cardboard box dumped unceremoniously in the loading bay. The donor, Mrs. Albright, had simply labeled it, in her spidery looping handwriting, "Misc. Historical Junk." I sighed, pulled on my thin cotton gloves, and began sifting through layers of moth-eaten, lace, and chipped porcelain. Each item was a monument to the ordinary: a bent spectacle frame, a tarnished silver baby rattle, a coil of rope, the kind of things that make an archivist want to scream into a pillow. It was tucked beneath a pile of faded sheet music, heavy and unassuming. My fingers brushed against the rough texture of a small, rectangular box made of dark, aged wood. It wasn't decorated or inlaid. Its surface was merely carved with deep, geometric patterns that felt almost painful to the touch, like braille that conveyed silence instead of meaning. It had no clasp, lock, or visible hinge, yet it felt strangely weighted, balanced. Curiosity, that fragile, almost forgotten muscle, twitched slightly in my chest. This object wasn't junk. It was deliberately hidden. I ran my thumb along the seam where the lid met the body, applying the slightest pressure, and the top slid away with a soft, breathy whoosh, like an exhaled gasp. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet so worn it had turned gray, lay the object. It was a metal piece, about the length of my palm, tarnished to a deep, matte charcoal color, but clearly silver beneath the grime. It was not a typical house key, or even a safe key. This was an ornate relic, shaped precisely like a stylized crescent moon, its edges sharp, its center hollowed out like an eye. I lifted the silver object, surprised by its cold density. The mundane noise of the museum, the distant vacuum cleaner, the faint voices of tourists, receded instantly. There was a sudden, intense pressure behind my eyes, and the air around my hand seemed to thicken. The crescent moon key, dull and lifeless a moment ago, began to pulse, not with light, but with an internal, silent energy that vibrated against my gloved skin. It was faint at first, then intensified, a rapid, rhythmic thrumming that went straight to my core. Then, the image hit me. It wasn't a memory, a thought, or a dream. It was an intrusion, vivid and undeniable. I saw a place, a walled courtyard, but the walls were weeping with thick, glowing moss. Everything was illuminated by an ethereal, bluish light. In the center, there were impossible plants, ferns, that twisted into spirals, flowers that emitted soft, chiming noises, and moss that seemed to shift color as I watched. It was beautiful, impossible, and utterly real. The vision lasted only a fraction of a second, yet it felt like an entire lifetime. My hand snapped back, and the vision vanished, leaving behind a sharp, ringing silence in my ears. The key lay innocent and dark on the velvet. The archivist in me immediately scrambled for a rational explanation. A sudden drop in blood sugar, I strained from the fluorescent lights, or maybe a reaction to ancient metal dust. But the adrenaline, still pumping through my veins, screamed the truth. That image had been an invitation. A door had just been presented to me. The heavy silence of the archive room no longer felt comforting. It felt like a barrier. I slipped the curious silver object into my pocket, the warmth that left behind a stark contrast to the chilled air, and knew, with a certainty that thrilled me, that my days of cataloging historical junk were utterly and completely over. The Lumina key had become my strange, silent companion. It rested in the pocket of my coat, a cool, dense weight that grounded me to an impossible vision. After the incident in the archive room, the museum felt less like a job and more like a cage. Every surface, every artifact, seemed duller, less real than the brief, shimmering glimpse of the Echo Garden. I couldn't concentrate on identifying a collection of antique buttons, or logging the provenance of a chipped ceramic dish. My mind was consumed by the image of singing ferns and bluish light. I knew, with a certainty that defied all reason, that the key was not a piece of historical junk. It was a beginning. My initial research at the museum proved entirely fruitless. The database, a digital graveyard of New Haven's mundane past, contained no mention of a Lumina key, crescent symbols, or any parallel dimensions. Naturally, the futility of searching among the certified records drove me to the only place in town that might harbor forgotten knowledge, the public library. Not the brightly lit, modern reading room, but the oppressive, dusty maze of the local history archives, tucked away on the basement level. The atmosphere below was heavy and still, smelling strongly of old glue and neglect. The air was thick enough to chew, a stark contrast to the brittle silence of my own workplace. I felt a nervous excitement, like a trespasser in a forbidden land. The sections I needed were roped off, accessible only through a cumbersome key system I had to sign out through the main desk. I spent the next 2 evenings immersed in solemn tomes that crumbled at the edges, searching for any mention of the unique symbol carved into the key's hollow eye. Hours dissolved into minutes as I turned page after laborious page. On the third night, nestled deep within a labyrinthine aisle of forgotten poetry collections, I encountered him. An old gentleman named Mr. Silas. He wasn't a librarian. He was merely there, perpetually reading the same volume of ancient Greek poetry. He was thin, dressed in layers of faded tweed, and his eyes, a startling shade of pale blue, were unnervingly keen. He watched me as I pulled down a massive, leather-bound book about local folklore, his expression thoughtful, almost pitying. "A beautiful thing, that curiosity," he remarked, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that seemed to absorb the dust in the air. "It can open doors, miss, but sometimes it lets things out too." I froze, the heavy book almost slipping from my grip. "I'm sorry, I don't follow." He only smiled faintly, a slow curve of the mouth that didn't reach his eyes. "You carry a certain charge about you, child. An electric hum, easily noticed by those who listen closely. You have found something you shouldn't have, haven't you? Something crescent-shaped, perhaps." My heart hammered against my ribs. How could he possibly know? I quickly tried to deny it, but the lie felt pathetic even to me. Mr. Silas just chuckled softly, a dry rustling sound. The greatest secrets are often hidden in plain sight. Or in the words that no one bothers to read anymore, he continued, gesturing vaguely toward a high shelf marked restrictive access pre-1800s. If you seek the Echo Garden, you must look for the words Lumina and silence, but heed my warning. Some things are best left undisturbed for the sake of quietude. He disappeared into the shadows of the shelves as silently as he had arrived, leaving me reeling and utterly alone. His warning, unsettling as it was, felt like confirmation. Fueled by this sudden, terrifying boost of information, I located the heavy, water-stained text he indicated. It was a handwritten journal, bound in dark, crumbling cloth, titled Chronicles of the Town's Inner Earth. I carefully flipped through the brittle pages, the fragile silence of the document confirming its immense age. There it was, near the middle. A flowing passage detailing the key of Lumina, the relic that served as a physical gateway between our dimension and the Echo Garden, a place described as a reservoir of collective human emotion and memory. The accompanying illustration was a crudely drawn map, showing familiar local landmarks overlaid with arcane symbols. The map pointed directly to the overgrown, abandoned municipal park on the edge of town. As I studied the map, carefully transcribing the cryptic instructions, a chill unrelated to the basement temperature swept over me. I finally left the library well past closing time, my brain buzzing with impossible data. Out on the quiet street, under the sickly yellow glow of a street lamp, I felt the unmistakable weight of observation. Parked 50 yards down the curb, almost swallowed by the night, was a long, sleek, entirely dark sedan. It wasn't running, but its windows were tinted deep black. I couldn't see anyone inside, but I knew, with a sudden, chilling certainty, that the occupant was watching me. The adventure I yearned for had found me, and now, it seemed, I had gained an unsettling shadow. I clutched the key in my pocket, the cold silver now a sign of committed purpose. The memory of the dark sedan, sitting like a predator 50 yards from my doorstep, was a coil of ice in my stomach. It had turned my abstract search into an immediate, physical necessity. I was no longer merely curious. I was running a race I hadn't known I'd entered, and I suddenly cared desperately about winning. The journal's cryptic map lay spread out on my kitchen table, anchoring my attention away from the chilling reality of being watched. The map was frustratingly vague, a series of squiggles that looked more like an artist's hasty sketch than a navigational aid. It depicted the municipal park, certainly, but overlaid with symbols. I spent the morning cross-referencing its lines against an official park blueprint I'd downloaded from the museum archives. I finally discovered the key. The map wasn't showing the paths we used, but the boundaries that had been there decades ago. The confluence of several faded symbols, a half circle, a single arrow, and a spiral pointed to an entirely forgotten quadrant of the park. This area was sectioned off by a low, ancient stone wall, completely consumed by tangled ivy, easily missed by anyone walking the modern trails. It was a space designed to be ignored. My heart hammered a complex rhythm of fear and exhilaration. This was it, the point of no return. Everything that happened next was a violation of the safe, predictable life I had lived for 24 years. I felt a tremendous push and pull. One voice, sensible and loud, screamed about fantasy, security, and the likely possibility of being arrested for trespassing. The other voice, quiet, yet insistent, was the pure, crystalline silence left behind by the key's vision, promising a world of color and wonder beyond my wildest dreams. I knew that if I hesitated, if I gave myself another day to think, the sheer weight of logic would crush my nerve. I had to go now. Preparation was strangely grounding. I shed my predictable wardrobe of muted cardigans and sensible slacks for worn denim and sturdy lace-up boots, practical clothing for scrambling over overgrown terrain. I packed a canvas backpack with meticulous care, a powerful shockproof flashlight, a half-liter of water, and a cheap notebook to record anything I saw. Crucially, I wrapped the Lumina key in a handkerchief, tucking it securely into an inner zipped pocket. I did not want the silver object accidentally glowing in public, announcing my destination to the world or, worse, to the occupant of the dark sedan. I decided to move just as the sun dipped beneath the horizon. When the light was fading but the darkness hadn't fully clamped down, the opportune moment for a discreet entrance. As I stepped onto the street, I scanned my surroundings with a hyper-awareness I hadn't possessed before. My stomach tightened. There it was, parked 2 blocks down, a familiar shadow against the brickwork. It was unmistakably the same sleek, black vehicle. They were waiting. They knew I was going to move, and they were giving me just enough rope to hang myself. Fear quickly transformed into a cold, hard anger. This was no longer a game of historical curiosity. It was an active threat to my freedom and my discovery. I pulled the hood of my jacket over my head, gripping the straps of my bag until my knuckles were white, and started walking briskly in the opposite direction from the park's main entrance. I cut sharply into a residential alleyway, navigating between recycling bins and overgrown hedges, using the complex urban geography to buy myself time. The moment I heard the distant, low growl of a powerful engine starting up, I broke into a full-out run. The sound wasn't close, but the implication was clear. They had seen me and were now following. I emerged from the alley and sprinted across a quiet street, toward the park's less used western gate. My lungs burned, and the cool evening air stung my face, but I didn't dare slow down. I imagined the sedan sweeping around the corner, cutting me off, and that vision fueled my legs. I burst through the rusty metal gate, and immediately plunged off the paved path, disappearing into the dense, wild growth. The scent of pine and wet soil filled my nostrils, replacing the city's smog. I kept low, scrambling over gnarled roots and broken branches, trusting the flimsy paper map in my hand. I could no longer hear the car. I was truly alone now, surrounded by the park's immense breathing silence. The only company I had was the steady, pulsing warmth of the Lumina key against my body, guiding me toward the forgotten stone wall, and the impossible space it concealed. I was ready to open the door. I didn't stop moving until the throbbing in my temples matched the frantic rhythm of my heart. The immense, sprawling density of the abandoned park had become my shield. I plunged deeper into the wilderness, using the gnarled oaks and thickets of untamed rhododendrons as cover. The chase had transformed the park from a dreary, neglected space into a high-stakes obstacle course. I scrambled over fallen logs and pushed through low-hanging branches, trusting my instincts more than my eyes in the rapidly diminishing light. I didn't hear the roar of the car engine again, but the silence was almost worse. It meant they were being subtle, methodical. They knew this area better than I did. I visualized the dark sedan inching its way along the perimeter roads, waiting for me to emerge from the undergrowth, or, worse, anticipating my destination. I had to use the complex geography of the interior, the confusing, winding deer trails and forgotten footpaths, to truly shake them off. I doubled back twice, moving perpendicular to the direction the map indicated, just to disrupt any predictive pattern they might be establishing. Only when I was certain I was alone, deep in a section where the trees were ancient and the ground was choked with moss, did I finally slow my pace. I crouched behind a monumental granite boulder, pulling the crumpled map from my pocket. My hands were shaking, less from fatigue and more from the sheer, terrifying realization that my life had completely diverged from its path. I was involved in something dangerous, something that clearly mattered to powerful, faceless people. I unfolded the map, flattening the delicate paper against the boulder. The key's warmth, usually a soft pulse, was now a definite, focused heat emanating from my jacket pocket, a physical compass needle pointing the way. I aligned the paper with a distinctive, three-pronged tree formation, nearby a landmark mentioned in the journal and traced the path with a dirty finger. The final destination was not far, a corner of the park that officially didn't exist. A triangle of land squeezed between an old reservoir boundary and a crumbling utility shed. Scrambling again, I followed the unwavering heat of the Lumina key. The vegetation here grew thicker, wilder, signaling a total lack of human maintenance for several decades. I finally located the feature the map promised, a low, thick boundary of mortared stone, almost swallowed whole by a massive, twisting curtain of dark ivy. It wasn't the majestic entrance I might have expected from the description of an impossible garden. It looked exactly like an unremarkable, long-forgotten garden wall. I peeled back the heavy vines, exposing the cold, damp stone. There was no visible door, no crack, no seam, only solid, unyielding rock. Doubt, sharp and sudden, pierced the bubble of my resolve. Had Mr. Silas misled me? Was this all just an elaborate fantasy dreamed up by an eccentric historian? I ran my hand over the rough surface, searching for a lever or a hidden mechanism. Nothing. Then, I remembered the key's true nature. It wasn't meant for a physical lock, but for a magical seal. Taking a deep breath, I pulled the Lumina key from its handkerchief cocoon. It was heavier than I recalled, its crescent shape perfect and cold. I held the broad end flat against the wall, at the location where the map's spiral symbol intersected the stone. The reaction was instantaneous and profound. The moment the tarnished silver touched the stone, the wall itself began to hum. It was not a sound I heard with my ears, but a vibration felt deep within my bones. A hairline fracture of soft, bluish-green light appeared around the key, spreading outward like a spider web across the rock face. The ivy shivered, and the air around me crackled with the scent of ozone and something overwhelmingly sweet, like honeysuckle blooming in the dark. The stone didn't crumble, it became fluid. The central section of the wall shimmered, the blue light intensifying until the rock dissolved entirely, not into dust, but into a swirling vortex of pure, living color. It was exactly the shade I had glimpsed in my vision, a blinding, yet soft, blue-green. It looked like looking into the heart of a nebula, compressed into a doorway. The sound of plant song, previously only a distant memory, now drifted out from the opening, soft and melodic. I stood transfixed, staring at the impossible breach in the solid world, the key pulsing so rapidly in my hand it felt alive. This was my earthquake. This was the adventure I had wished for in the suffocating silence of the museum. I looked back, toward the mundane world of trees and shadows, thinking of the quiet archives and the ominous black car. Shaking off the last remnants of fear, I tightened my grip on the key, tucked my chin, and stepped without hesitation through the shimmering, impossible gate. Stepping across the threshold was less like walking through a doorway, and more like plunging into deep, warm water. The swirling blue-green light of the portal washed over me, and the damp air of the park vanished, replaced instantly by an atmosphere so pure it felt like breathing for the first time. My ears, ringing from the abrupt silence of the outside world, were immediately filled with a complex, gentle chorus. It was the plant song I had heard faintly before, now surrounding me, a collection of high-pitched, crystalline tones that resonated like wind chimes made of spun sugar. I landed softly on a bed of moss, which wasn't green, but a luminous, shifting gold. This place, the Echo Garden, defied every physical law I had ever known. The light wasn't coming from a sun or a lamp, but seemed to emanate directly from the ground and the strange vegetation around me. It cast no shadows, bathing everything in a soft, ethereal luminescence that made the air feel velvety. I took a hesitant step, and the golden moss beneath my boot compressed with a faint, musical sigh. The plants were the most astonishing part. They weren't botanical. They were architectural, magical. Towers of thin, pearlescent material spiraled toward the unseen ceiling above. Each tower segment glowing faintly purple before releasing a small, shimmering orb of light that floated away. Ferns, their leaves, the color of oxidized copper, twisted themselves into the shape of delicate treble clefs, emitting the highest notes in the garden's song. There was no soil, only the expansive, yielding moss, traversed by shallow streams of liquid light that flowed without sound. I stood there for a long moment, completely overwhelmed. My mundane life as an archivist, the dusty records, the dark sedan, the fear, all of it felt impossibly distant, like a bad dream from 1,000 years ago. The key, still warm in my hand, was the only tangible link to the outside world, yet here, it felt completely at home. It pulsed slower now, a steady, calm rhythm, as if settling into its purpose. As I began to move forward, the wonder gave way to a dawning, intense comprehension. This wasn't just a beautiful place. The air wasn't merely fragrant with jasmine. It carried a faint, almost imperceptible emotional residue. I felt a fleeting sense of joy, sharp and bright, followed instantly by a wave of profound melancholy. It was as if the place itself was breathing in memories. Mr. Silas's words echoed in my mind, a reservoir of collective human emotion. The garden was alive in a way that had nothing to do with biology. I realized I couldn't just wander aimlessly. Although the scenery was distracting, an inexplicable, powerful pull began to assert itself. It wasn't a physical force, but a profound internal directive, originating from the lumina key and vibrating deep in my sternum. The feeling was a mix of obligation and destiny, urging me toward a destination. The light of the garden seemed to converge in one direction, highlighting a faint path through the surreal foliage. The need to find the center was not intellectual. It was elemental, a deep yearning to complete a circuit. I followed the path, my steps hushed by the golden moss. With every yard I covered, the key in my palm grew warmer, no longer with a nervous thrum, but with an assured, steady heat that promised resolution. This journey was not about sightseeing, it was about fixing something broken, though I didn't yet understand what or how. I noticed that the impossible flora had a pattern of growth that seemed to indicate decay. While some plants glowed brilliantly, others were dim, their colors muted, their melodic tones reduced to a low, painful moan. Patches of the luminous moss were scarred by dark, brittle patches that absorbed the light. This place was fragile, wounded. My task, whatever it was, suddenly felt serious, far beyond my personal desire for adventure. I was in a sick world, and the key was the only known medicine. I tightened my grip on the silver crescent and picked up my pace, determined to reach the heart of the Echo Garden before the beautiful, impossible light completely faded. The soft, pulsing light of the echo garden had lulled me into a false sense of security, convincing me I was in a sacred, protected place. That illusion shattered instantly. As I navigated around a pillar of shimmering, spiral-shaped growth, I caught a flicker of movement in the periphery of my vision, a disturbance in the perfect, luminescent flow. They were shadowy, formless figures, more like intense pockets of absorbed light than solid beings. They darted quickly between the singing plants, moving too fast to track properly, yet their presence cast a chilling, heavy shadow on the golden moss. These were not the delightful fauna of the garden. These were predators. I instinctively tightened my hold on the Lumina key, its warmth spiking suddenly, recognizing the imminent danger. The nearest one surged forward. It wasn't a run or a leap. It was a sudden elongation of darkness. The shadowy entity made no sound, but the high-pitched plant songs around it instantly turned dissonant, wailing in protest as the shadow absorbed the light and life from the nearby foliage. They were drawn to me, or perhaps, to the intense, stabilizing energy of the key I carried. I instinctively raised my hand, shielding my face, and the key reacted. Without conscious thought, the crescent moon object projected a focused, thin beam of intense, pure, white light, utterly different from the ambient blue-green. It was like a laser carved from moonlight. The beam struck the approaching shadow, and the creature recoiled instantly, shrinking back with a silent, violent shudder. For a fleeting moment, I saw a core of raw, tormented energy within the shadow, before it dissolved completely into the surrounding darkness. The key wasn't just a physical opener. It was a weapon, a focused beam of purification. Realizing this, I felt a surge of empowerment, quickly followed by paralyzing terror. I could repel them, but there were too many. They began circling, calculating, moving in synchronized, silent waves. Just as I prepared to aim the light beam again, a voice hissed from a cluster of tall, crystal reeds nearby. "Don't use too much light. It draws more of them." A moment later, a figure stumbled out from the reeds. It was a young man, perhaps my own age, dressed in clothes that looked like normal cotton but were stained with green, glowing residue. He was thin and pale, his eyes wide with desperate fatigue. He looked less like a resident of this magical place, and more like someone who had been hiding here for weeks. "Who are you?" I demanded, pointing the key's silver crescent defensively toward him. "Leo," he whispered urgently. "And you're carrying a target. Listen, you need to get deeper into the center. That key is meant to fix this place, not fight its problems one by one." He glanced nervously at the shadows that were tentatively starting to close the circle again. "They are the Watchers. They're attracted to the energy of Lumina. Their corrupted emotions." His words, spoken with frantic conviction, struck me as true. I lowered the key slightly, deciding instantly to trust him. "Why are you here, Leo? And why are those things here?" He took a trembling breath. "I came through another gateway years ago, chasing a fool's dream. Now I'm just trying to survive. The Watchers are the negative feelings, grief, resentment, despair that were trapped here when the gate was improperly sealed long ago. They solidified into these things. They feed on the garden's failing light." He gestured toward the patches of decay I had noticed earlier. "They want to keep the garden closed, keep the memories silent, keep us trapped." The truth of it settled over me like a shroud. The garden was a reflection of the outside world, a place sick with suppressed sorrow. I gripped the Lumina key, its weight now representing the heavy burden of my unexpected mission. Leo pointed toward a section of the path that seemed momentarily clear. We have to move, now. I know a safer route to the center. The core. That's where the key belongs. It will restore the silence, meaning it will cleanse the trauma and heal the garden. They won't let you get there easily. His explanation clicked everything into place. Mr. Silas's warning about things best left undisturbed, the way the garden pulsed with memory, the darkness of the watchers. I glanced once more at the circling shadows, now bolder, their formless shapes coalescing slightly. I nodded firmly at Leo, replacing the archivist's cautious hesitation with the fighter's grim determination. The time for observation was over. It was time to run, to fight, and to fulfill the key's purpose. Leo led the way, his movements quick and economical, weaving through the shimmering flora like a ghost. He seemed to possess an intimate knowledge of the garden's labyrinthine structure, knowing exactly where the watchers were thin, and where the moss provided the most sound absorption. I followed closely, the lumina key now resting in my hand, ready to fire its sharp, purifying light should a shadow get too close. The air of silent panic had been replaced by focused, breathless haste. As we traveled, Leo explained more about the space. The Echo Garden isn't a forest, it's a mindscape. It collects the emotional residue from the people in New Haven, all the things they suppress, the grief they swallow, the dreams they abandon. That's what sustains its life and gives it its bizarre beauty. He pointed toward a bank of pale, bell-shaped flowers that were emitting a low, sorrowful drone. Those are the silenced regrets. If they stay silent too long, they start to decay, and that decay attracts the watchers. His revelation was profound, giving a deeper, more chilling meaning to the place. I looked around at the impossible landscape and started seeing it not as magic, but as concentrated, suppressed humanity. The areas where the moss was dark and brittle, where the light streams had gone stagnant, suddenly felt like pockets of deep, unaddressed trauma. It was a mirror of my hometown, reflecting the quiet desperation I had felt in the museum, multiplied 1,000-fold. As if confirming this, we passed a reflective pool, a body of water, so still it perfectly mirrored the shimmering roof above. I caught my own reflection, but beneath my image, the water pulsed with foreign flashes. I saw a quick succession of scenes, a blurry image of my father looking disappointed. A missed opportunity for a scholarship I'd been too afraid to apply for. The dull, crushing feeling of accepting the museum job when I longed to be an explorer. They were my own past fears and missed opportunities, not physically present, but vibrating in the garden's atmosphere. It was deeply unsettling. The garden shows you what you've buried, Leo murmured, noticing my fixed gaze on the pool. It's why the watchers focus on those who carry keys, those who threaten to open things up. They want everything to stay locked down. That includes your own doubts, Amanda. I felt a sharp sting of recognition. My stagnation in New Haven wasn't just circumstantial. It was self-imposed. A fear of failure that had hardened into routine. This garden wasn't just a place to fix. It was a personal challenge. I was holding the Lumina key, but the real lock was inside me. After what felt like hours, the landscape began to change again. The dense, sprawling growth receded, replaced by an open, central clearing. In the middle, stood a structure that commanded immediate reverence. It was a massive fountain, though clearly not intended for water. It was constructed of ancient, smooth white stone, intricately carved with symbols that matched the Lumina key. However, it was ruined. The stone was cracked and streaked with dark decay, and the basin was filled with the same stagnant, dark material I had seen infecting the moss. Yet, despite its broken state, it radiated power. The core, Leo breathed, his voice filled with a mixture of reverence and anxiety. The central nexus, the key must be placed in the primary slot here. That resets the garden's equilibrium and purifies the stored emotions. It's the final step to restoring the silence, the healing silence, not the fearful one. We approached the fountain cautiously. I could feel the intense magnetic pull of the structure, urging me to complete the journey. The crescent shape of the key in my hand seemed too perfectly aligned with a deep depression at the fountain's apex. Resolution was just inches away. I took a step forward, the sense of destiny now overwhelming, ready to end the long night, when a cold, calculated voice sliced through the ambient plant song, freezing me mid-step. "I'm afraid, miss, that journey ends right there." The voice was cold and precise, cutting through the melodic plant song like glass, shattering. I spun around, my heart vaulting into my throat. Standing perhaps 20 feet away, framed by two tall, shimmering reeds, was the man from the dark sedan. He looked even more imposing here than he had as a silhouette on the street. He was tall, dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit that looked oddly formal against the ethereal backdrop, and his expression was completely devoid of emotion. This was Mr. Finch. Leo sucked in a sharp breath and immediately retreated behind the ruined fountain, trembling. "Finch. I knew they'd send him," he whispered, his eyes wide with fear. Finch ignored Leo completely, his pale, steady gaze fixed solely on the Lumina key vibrating in my grip. "I must congratulate you, miss," he said, his tone detached, almost clinical. "Your progress was surprisingly rapid. We monitored your movements from the moment you accessed the old chronicles. You are certainly more resourceful than you appear." The realization hit me. They hadn't been chasing me randomly. They had been waiting for me to do their reconnaissance, to lead them directly to the core. My fear solidified into a bitter resentment. I raised the key slightly, ready to defend myself. "Who are you, and who is we?" Finch took a slow, deliberate step forward, his polished black shoes sinking slightly into the golden moss. "We are simply the custodians of order, Miss Amanda. We are the ones who recognize that the world functions because certain things are kept separate. I am merely the agent responsible for ensuring this gate remains permanently sealed. I was hoping you would give me the key without incident, allowing me to close this disturbance quietly. You want to keep this place sick?" I challenged, gesturing toward the dark, stagnant water filling the fountain basin. "Leo says this garden is dying because it's been closed off for so long. The Watchers are proof of that." Finch offered a subtle, dismissive wave of his hand. "The Watchers are a necessary byproduct of power. You see, decay. I see equilibrium. The Echo Garden collects the powerful, messy emotions of humanity. If you place that key into the core, you won't just reset it. You will trigger a massive release, a torrent of raw, unpurified emotion and magic directly into New Haven. Think about it. All that suppressed grief, all that ambition, all that latent power, suddenly spilling out." His words struck a chilling chord. He wasn't just a simple villain. He was appealing to the logical, cautious part of my nature. The archivist who valued order above all else. He was holding up a terrifying vision. Chaos engulfing the sleepy, quiet streets of my hometown, replacing routine with madness. "We closed the gate decades ago for a reason," Finch continued, his voice lowering to a persuasive, grave register. "The world outside isn't ready to handle its own hidden feelings made manifest. The ensuing madness would tear down the fabric of society overnight. You have a chance now to be a hero, Amanda. By simply putting the key away, and allowing us to lock this door forever. Your life can return to its predictable, safe rhythm. He was appealing to my greatest comfort, the safe rhythm of my old life. I could easily rationalize his argument. A boring life was better than one destroyed by uncontrollable magic. I looked down at the Lumina key. I felt the powerful, magnetic pull of the core slot, beckoning me to complete the mission, and I remembered the images in the reflective pool. My own stagnation, my fears of failure. Finch was offering me safety, but at the cost of the fulfillment I had so desperately sought. I met his gaze, my hand finally steady. "No," I said, the single word echoing with a surprising strength. "The rhythm you're offering is death. A predictable, slow death built on fear. The garden is not a bomb. It's a living thing that needs to breathe. And if the world can't handle its own truth, then it needs to change." Finch's expression finally hardened. The last vestige of civility vanished, replaced by a cold fury. "A foolish decision. You choose a terrible destiny, then." He reached inside his jacket, not for a gun, but for a device, a compact, sleek object that hummed with a low power. Simultaneously, the shadowy watchers, who had been lingering at the edge of the clearing, seemed to draw power from his movement. They began to advance, forming a wall of silent, aggressive darkness between me and the sanctuary behind the fountain. The time for talking had ended. The fight for the core had just begun. The time for deliberation was over. The moment I uttered that single word, "No," the quiet tension in the clearing snapped. Mr. Finch moved with a terrifying, professional speed, raising the sleek device in his hand. It wasn't a weapon that fired bullets, but something far more insidious, a humming black cube that seemed to draw the light out of the air. Simultaneously, the wall of watchers surged, their shadowy forms pooling together, their silent aggression becoming a palpable pressure that felt like cold mud pressing against my mind. "You have chosen poorly," Finch stated. And a pulse of dark energy erupted from his device, directed at the Lumina key. I reacted purely on instinct. I snapped the key up, focusing my entire will on the silver crescent. The key responded with a violent, beautiful burst of pure white light, not just a thin beam, but a shield. The light slammed into Finch's dark pulse, creating a momentary flash that threw both of us backward. The impact jarred my teeth and sent a burning sensation up my arm, but the key held. "Now, Leo," I screamed, pushing myself up from the golden moss. Leo didn't hesitate. He launched himself out from behind the fountain, shouting a strange high-pitched cry that didn't sound human. He sprinted toward a cluster of luminous, purple-veined flowers near the edge of the clearing, deliberately making himself the primary target. The watchers, momentarily stunned by the light clash, immediately broke ranks, a third of their number peeling off to pursue the easier, more frantic energy source. "Get the key into the core, I'll buy you time," Leo yelled, disappearing into the cover of the shimmering reeds. My breath caught in my throat, witnessing his sudden, selfless courage. He was running toward danger for me, the archivist he had known for less than an hour. I couldn't waste his sacrifice. Ignoring the pain in my shoulder, I focused entirely on the fountain, only 20 feet away, but guarded by Finch and the remaining, aggressive horde of watchers. I raised the Lumina key again, no longer aiming defensively. I pointed the crescent directly at the cluster of watchers, moving to flank Finch. "Clear a path," I whispered to the silver metal. A powerful, focused stream of pure white light erupted, carving a brilliant, temporary tunnel through the shadows. The watchers caught in the beam did not merely retreat, They vaporized into glittering motes of dust, their suppressed negativity momentarily purified. Finch shouted in frustration, turning his device on me again, but I was already moving, sprinting across the moss in the path cleared by the light. He fired another wave of dark energy. I twisted violently, the pulse missing my head by inches, striking the stone wall behind me with a sickening thud. The wall did not dissolve. It cracked, showing the immense force of his power. I reached the ruined fountain, stumbling against the cold, cracked stone. Finch was closing the distance, his pace quick, his fury palpable. My lungs were burning, my arms aching from the key's energy drain, but I didn't slow. I reached the fountain's apex, where the lumina key's crescent perfectly matched the depression in the stone. Finch was almost on me, just 3 paces away. I could hear his harsh breathing over the distant, mournful cries of the flora. I couldn't afford to hesitate. With a final, desperate surge of adrenaline, I slammed the key, but first, into the slot. The world stopped. There was no sound. Only an instant, blinding eruption of pure, benevolent light. It wasn't the surgical beam of the key. It was the light of 1,000 suns, radiating outward from the core. The energy wave was not destructive. It was cleansing. It swept over me, a physical torrent of warmth and overwhelming emotional release. I felt every single trapped feeling in the garden years of suppressed sorrow, unspoken words, and forgotten laughter all rushing past me, a tidal wave of human experience finally set free. The force slammed me to the ground, my eyes squeezed shut. When the light subsided, the world was silent again, but this was a different, profound silence. I opened my eyes slowly. The core fountain was still cracked, but the stagnant darkness was gone, replaced by clear, flowing liquid light. The surrounding moss now glowed with an intensified, healthy gold. Mr. Finch stood perhaps 10 feet away, motionless. He wasn't harmed, but his charcoal suit was covered in glittering dust, and the black cube device had fallen from his limp hand. He looked around the purified clearing, his cold composure utterly broken. He hadn't been defeated by force, but overwhelmed by the sheer, undeniable beauty of the garden's healing. He was defeated by the truth he had tried so hard to suppress. I pushed myself into a sitting position, my body exhausted but my soul exhilaratingly light. The Lumina key was gone. It had fully merged with the core, sacrificing its individuality to complete the reset. I had done it. I had unlocked and cleansed the forgotten heart of the town's hidden life. The light had faded back into the ambient blue-green glow of the garden, leaving behind a silence that was complete and healing. I pushed myself up, my body sore but my spirit feeling impossibly light. The air was crisp, clean, and filled with a complex, joyful hum from the flora. The decay was gone. The dark, stagnant liquid in the core fountain now flowed with a clear, luminous fluid. The healing was complete. I looked over at Mr. Finch. He was sitting on the moss, his head bowed. His composure utterly shattered, not by violence, but by the sheer, undeniable force of released emotion. His black cube device lay shattered nearby. He looked up at me, his eyes empty. "You have ruined everything," he murmured, devoid of his earlier chilling intensity. "The stability, the structure." "No," I replied softly, my voice calm and firm. I opened the window. The structure was built on a lie. A rustle in the reeds announced Leo's return. He emerged, rubbing a bruised arm, but his face was alight with exhilaration. He looked around the pristine clearing, breathing deeply. It worked. The watchers, they just faded. The garden is singing again. Thank you, Amanda. You saved it. We didn't linger. The feeling of closure was overwhelming, but the lingering presence of Finch warned us that we couldn't stay. Leo showed me a small, secondary exit near the fountain, a crack in the wall. Perfectly sized for slipping through, easily missed. Before I went through, I looked back at the magnificent, now healing garden, etched forever in my mind. The Lumina key, however, was gone, fully absorbed into the core, completing its sacred purpose. Stepping back into the park was disorienting. The portal snapped shut behind us, leaving only the same vine-covered, unremarkable stone wall. The cool, damp scent of the real world replaced the garden's heavy perfume. The darkness of the outside night felt strangely comforting after the relentless, shadowless illumination of the other world. Leo, after a solemn nod of farewell, and a cryptic promise that he was no longer trapped, melted away into the surrounding woods, carrying his own secrets and new freedom. I walked home slowly, the adrenaline completely drained, leaving behind a profound, satisfying exhaustion. The black sedan was nowhere in sight. Perhaps Finch had departed, defeated. Perhaps he was still lurking, waiting for another chance. I didn't care as much as I should have. The fear was still there, a tiny seed, but it was overshadowed by a forest of newfound certainty. I returned to the museum the next morning. The air still smelled of wood polish and old paper. The grandfather clock still ticked its relentless rhythm. My job was the same, cataloging. But I was fundamentally different. The world hadn't changed, but my internal landscape had undergone a colossal shift. My routine was no longer a cage, it was a choice. I sat at my desk, not with a sigh of resignation, but with a sense of quiet authority. I noticed the tiny details in the donated artifacts, the fingerprint on a glass jar, the inscription inside a watch hand, saw them now as fragments of genuine, complicated human stories, not just historical junk. The small, quiet town of New Haven seemed brighter. Not magically, but emotionally. Perhaps the release of all that suppressed emotion from the Echo Garden had indeed trickled out, leaving behind a subtle, pervasive lightness in the atmosphere. The world hadn't broken into chaos, as Finch had feared. It had simply softened. I reached into my pocket, expecting the cool weight of the Lumina key, but found only the handkerchief. I smiled. The key was gone, but the adventure wasn't. I was no longer waiting for life to start. I was living it, knowing that there were depths and impossible wonders hidden beneath the most mundane surfaces. I decided, right then, that the next step was to find Mr. Silas. I had successfully unlocked the gate. Now, I needed to learn how to be its guardian, because the true adventure was not finding the magic, but choosing to believe in it every single day.